How's it going, ladies and bruises? I'm Sixkilla. Welcome back to Sekimeiya. It's time for us to continue with Katei's plan to catch Ashiya. Because they think they've got this shit sorted out, and they really don't. Because they're really not expecting this whole lockdown business to happen, but you know, whatever. None of us saw that coming, did we? I mean, Katei saw the busy waveform. He knew his bait had been effective. Since Shin had attacked the gem shop, Ito hadn't spoken to his boss. Katei had wanted to know Shin's position after their failure, so he'd given Ito information about the Sekimeiya to report to his group. At a low volume, he listened to the audio in his dim office. The second time, the conversation was a lot more substantial. Katei thrilled internally. An overwhelming amount of details were being revealed to him. He finally knew many of Shin's secrets that had tormented him for so long. I don't know how that just happened. He heard Shin's design their plan. Even though the end sounded muffled, Ashiya's lure wouldn't work. There would be no attack before the 15th, and most importantly, Katei could no longer follow through with his scheme. Shin would attack during the daytime, the alarm wouldn't be activated, and Katei's voice could only be heard by other people. In addition, even if the alarm was activated, Katei would be able to offer a Shin member a quick escape, as the outside of the building wouldn't be deserted. However, there was something else Katei realised. Shin were right. The Sekimeiya's value was already much higher than it was what Ashiya had expected. To incentivize Shin's attack, Ashiya had been building an air of mystery around the gemstone, which had rapidly expanded. Until the 15th, the Sekimeiya's worth would be far higher than everything else Ashiya had ever possessed. Katei didn't feel pressured. He had very valuable information. He had learned that the concept of his plan could still be executed, albeit differently. He could anonymously threaten Ito with the audio, but that would give away Katei's source of information, and unlike after his previous plan, Shin wouldn't be indebted to him. As such, he decided to change his way of thinking for the time being. The Sekimeiya, he could obtain it himself and postpone the idea of blackmailing Shin. He had the key to the cabinet and a trump card he'd saved for years, the storeroom's secret. Before Katei's parents had died, the building had undergone severe expansions. The secret corridor had always remained a hidden part of the lowest floor, but nobody who knew about it remained. Naturally, Katei had tested it already. Was Shin aware of its existence? He had easily been able to confirm it had never opened during their attacks. Does that mean Katei was the son from the end of the last chapter? The one that survived? How could Katei have taken the Sekimeiya out of the tower? Despite all he knew, it wasn't a simple task. He couldn't act out a fake Shin attack where he didn't have the night shift. If he entered through the storeroom, he could be seen from the security room. He could take action when he had the night shift. He could bring the Sekimeiya to the storeroom and claim Shin had erased the security footage, but would such a thing be believable? He wasn't worried that Shin could threaten him anymore. He had the upper hand in that battle, and he could expose a good deal about them, yet Katei's story wouldn't be too convenient. His alarm would have to be somehow bypassed, and Katei would have to let them escape. But if he activated the alarm by forcing open the cabinet, then, when the exit unlocked, no Shin member would be found in the building, and the Sekimeiya would have magically disappeared. There was only one way Katei could make that work, by saying that he had seen someone escaping toward the storeroom. However, he didn't want to reveal the existence of a hidden door yet. There was no smooth story that let Katei weasel out. He didn't want to be investigated by Ashiya or Shin, but every scenario sounded iffy, and had him as an early suspect. That was until he realized that the perfect moment existed. A moment where he wouldn't be the only suspect, where his story would be believed without doubt. The day of the event. The day when Shin would be in the tower, and when Katei would be in the security room. He could use their own attack against him to obfuscate his involvement. He knew what would happen, and what Shin's actions would be. He immediately thought of a way to take advantage of them. Sekimeiya's cabinet had been designed to trigger the alarm upon being minimally damaged. At 9:04, a vast cloud of smoke was going to be released in the event room. Even though the cabinet could be unlocked, the mere damage of the smoke could set off the alarm. In any case, if the alarm went off at that time, it wouldn't be questioned. A real attack would have triggered it, so it would have served its function. Katei had designed the system, and he knew that Shin didn't have access to the tower's computer. If he altered the system to automatically activate the alarm at that time, no one would know. He could trap Shin in the tower and then carry out the rest of the plan himself. In addition, Katei had another reason to trigger the alarm, to aid Shin before his intervention. The only way their plan could fail was if people from the outside quickly raided the building despite the smoke. That was something the alarm could prevent. Katei's initial idea was promising, and he could develop it further. Shin would disable the hallway cameras, the hallway A cameras, where the security room and the storeroom were. That meant that before the attack, Katei could quickly go to the lobby and discuss what to do during the event with the police. That would be the last recording of hallway A. Upon seeing the smoke, everyone would rapidly evacuate, unaware that the alarm would soon be activated. Then, during the chaos, Katei would re-enter the hallway. That would no longer be caught by the cameras. As he heard Shin's discussion, he knew that by crawling, he would avoid falling unconscious. He knew that Artisei's movements would be what Artisei's movements would be. The alarm wouldn't influence him. He would go to the cleaning room. So Katei had the opportunity to take the Sekimeiya to the cabinet if it was unlocked. If it wasn't, he'd go take it from the cleaning cart after Artisei finished his job. Then he could rapidly go to the storeroom and leave the Sekimeiya behind the movable wall. Lei had told him that it couldn't be kept at a warm temperature, but the storeroom's corridor was colder than the rest of the tower due to it being unregulated. Lastly, he would leave using his unique key. Everyone would be in front of the entrance, and he wouldn't be seen stepping out of the building. Then, he would appear from behind them, as if he'd evacuated, which Hallway A's camera would corroborate. Nobody would be in the security room, so after 12 hours the shutter would open. Then someone inside the building would be guaranteed to be a member of Shin, and responsible for triggering the alarm. However, nobody would know that the Sekimeiya had been stolen because Shin's fake would remain inside, and nobody would suspect Katei of having had any involvement, as he couldn't have. Not even Shin would suspect him. That's a clever plan, man, I like it. And in the future, he could retrieve the real Sekimeiya from the storeroom without an issue. Everything was finally in motion, and the long wait for the day of the event began. Ashiya, Shin, and Katei. Each of those three parties had their own unique agenda. Every night, Ashiya expected Shin's attack. However, Katei knew it wouldn't happen yet, and kept mentally rehearsing his plan. Meanwhile, Shin received their replica of the Sekimeiya. Ido, who had seen, touched, and measured the original, confirmed there was no glaring difference between the two, and that unless Ashiya had foreseen a replica being created, it would work. As the days approached, Ashiya realized Shin were likely to not fall for their trap, and as Shin had predicted, the Sekimeiya continued to grow more valuable in the eyes of the world. Ashiya hadn't fully prepared the event yet, so a trusted employee of theirs was chosen to plan out the guided visits. Artisei was under a lot of pressure. He had to make sure the plan was a success, and if he executed what had been laid out perfectly, the odds would be in his favour. All the preparations had been made. Slowly, the days of December ticked up to the 15th. December 15th. It's time for the heist. Oh. However, nobody expected what would happen on that day. 8 people were trapped in Ashiya Tower, but they weren't alone. That was the catalyst of the construction of a mountainous maze. Who reached its peak? It wasn't everyone who began the climb. You're lucky enough to have access to all its sides, but what about the peak? 3 parties formed at the mountain's base, unaware of how high it would go. Oh shit, what's happening? Save. This looks like an important decision. There's 3 options as well. Let's just roll with Katei. Let's go with Katei. We can always come back. It was almost time. Upon arriving at the tower, Katei had listened to the latest recording. As he had hoped, Ido and his boss had talked one last time and gone over their movements. Katei took out the SD card. He couldn't allow that audio to be heard by anyone else, and he didn't want the card in his person either. He hid it in the security room. The time was rapidly approaching, and he didn't have the opportunity to go back to the staff room. While he tried to remain calm, he hid the voice recorder as well. Although the large device could have been found if Ashiya searched, he knew that the SD card wouldn't be, which was all that mattered. Through the monitors, Katei saw the first group approaching the event room. He had to act. Even though nobody was seeing him, he approached the hallway nonchalantly. During the previous days, he kept coming up with good excuses to get out of the security room at that time. Hallway A was empty, but as soon as Katei entered it, so did someone else. From the lobby came a man with long hair, who he'd never seen before. Paying no attention to Katei, he walked forward. Behind the handrails, Katei knew the grenades were concealed, however, he couldn't look at them because the footage was going to be reviewed. Katei couldn't get distracted. Keeping his expression neutral, he stepped into the lobby. The room was full of people. All the visitors formed a line behind hallway B, while police officers conversed with Ashiya guards. Dorte and Asfu, Katei's co-workers, greeted him with a smile. Their job was to uncover the cabinets and most of the crystal rooms, but they knew very few people there that day wanted to see those. One more person reacted to Katei's arrival, the janitor. However, only Katei noticed it, as Ito looked away immediately. Nobody was looking at him, and he didn't want to walk away from the door. As if waiting for the conversation to end, he stared at the police as they talked. Katei's plan wasn't guaranteed to work, but he wasn't at risk. Once the smoke was released, the chance to step back into the hallway might not have existed. If someone gestured at Katei to evacuate, he couldn't turn around. However, it didn't matter. He wouldn't be blamed for the attack, and Shin's plan would still fail. Furthermore, it might have been possible to sneak away outside and re-enter the building through the storeroom anyway. The time passed faster than Katei had imagined. All of a sudden, he noticed the light in hallway A disappear. What's this? Smoke! Something happened in the hallway! Someone opened the door in front of the crowd. In an instant, a plume of smoke invaded the lobby, and the door was forcibly shut again. It's in both hallways. Katei felt a shock going through his body. That was the moment. In the blink of an eye, everyone had turned around toward the exit. While both police officers were alerting their superiors, as quickly as he could, Katei dashed into the hallway and dropped to his hands and knees. On the floor, someone almost crashed into him. A person he couldn't distinguish through the veil of smoke rapidly crawled to the lobby, slamming the door shut behind them. Suddenly, Katei could only hear his heartbeat. That person must have been the man he'd seen entering the hallway, but he couldn't be heard anymore. Only faint yells could. That was until a loud alarm rang through the building. Immediately afterward, a rough sound came from the lobby. Along with stronger yells, the shutter was closing. And just like that, Katei's plan was set in motion. He trapped himself, but nobody had realized it. He had seen the floor through the cameras. It was very likely only him and Artise were conscious. With utmost care, he slowly crawled toward the event room. From outside, he heard a sound. Artise was standing up. Amidst the pure silence, Katei heard him going to the cleaning room. That was Katei's chance to open the door slightly. When he did, he saw the floor of the event room, but all the bodies were too far away to be distinguished. Through the gap, he stared. He knew the darkness would prevent Artise from noticing him, and there was something he had to see. Days earlier, he'd uncovered the cabinet's curtain. He had seen two identical Sekimeiya lying atop the cushion. Although he'd gotten scared at first, Shin hadn't planted a fake yet. Ashiya had two identical gemstones. Shin would only be able to replace one, but Katei had the chance to obtain both. He merely had to observe from the hallway to learn which one got replaced. It only took Artise a few seconds to come back. When he did, he approached the cabinet while holding a glowing stone. Despite the darkness, once he uncovered the curtain, Katei was able to perceive Artise's shock. Two gemstones were contained in that cabinet. He was completely still until he reached for one of them. After taking out the rightmost one, Artise placed his own inside. He ran back without wasting even a second. That was Katei's moment. Overwhelmed by his unrelenting heartbeat, he rushed to the cabinet, covering his nose as he looked down. Admittedly, there was a small difference between them, but he knew the gem on the left was the valuable one. After taking it out, he hurriedly dropped the curtain as if nothing had happened. He re-entered the hallway. Everything was going as planned, but his frantic breaths refused to steady. The other Sekimeiya would be in the cleaning cart. Katei only had to be in the tower for a few more seconds. Hallway C was still being recorded, so he dashed to the lobby. However, on the way, he abruptly stopped himself. He stared at his hands in confusion. What had happened? There was no glow there. It didn't make any sense. He could feel the Sekimeiya's touch, but it didn't look like it was there. Bewildered, he stepped toward the light in the lobby, and once it illuminated his hands, he saw what had happened. The Sekimeiya was no longer white. He looked around it. A metal shutter was covering the exit, but somehow the gemstone in his hands was more bizarre. He looked at it with concern at the same time that he recalled Lei's words. It was essential for the Sekimeiya to remain in a cold space, and it couldn't be touched outside the cabinet. Had he damaged it? A nervous sweat broke out across his body. He lightly held the Sekimeiya with his suit instead so that he wouldn't directly contact it. The view of hallway B was identical. Not much could be seen a few steps ahead. Artise must have been out of the cleaning room already. Slowly, Katei turned its doorknob. The cart was there. Inside it, Katei saw the second Sekimeiya, which, unlike the one between his hands, still glowed dimly. He reached his right arm inside and took out the other Sekimeiya without touching it directly. Amazed, Katei stared at it. He couldn't know if the cloth of his shirt had made a difference, but its glow hadn't vanished that time. But the amazement quickly morphed into stupefaction. The Sekimeiya was hot. He couldn't believe it, but there was no mistaking it. The Sekimeiya that had been in the cart was clearly warmer than everything around it. Why? Was it also due to the absence of cold? Katei had to ignore it. He was running out of time. After stepping back into the hallway, he went inside the storeroom. He knew the secret mechanism very well. Entering the secret door, he placed both Sekimeiya on a suitcase, lying open on the floor. He left it there to be able to leave with the gemstone in the future. Finally, he felt the last door, and as he did, he wondered, would anyone see him? It couldn't be. Everyone must have been behind the main door. What? Where is it? Petrified, Katei kept going through all his pockets. The key wasn't there. There was no way out for him. Without it, just desperately, he looked at all the keys he had, but none of them had the particular rust he most wanted to feel. He realized that he must have dropped it. He kept it separately, and he verified that he'd had it in the security room. Therefore, he dropped it in hallway A when he'd been crawling toward the event room. Since his pocket had been close to the floor, he hadn't noticed the sound of it falling out. Fuck, no! Tightening his fist, he went back to the hallway. It was drenched in darkness, but the key had to be somewhere. He moved to the wall he'd crawled next to, and repeated the action, scanning the entire surface. Yes! Although he'd lost many precious seconds, he found it camouflaged under the smoke. He'd been trying to make very little noise, but he couldn't care about that anymore. As fast as he could, he ran back to the storeroom. He stopped before the secret exit. A bright, grassy field was outside it, and he was so close to seeing it. He located the keyhole and inserted the chili key into it. What? It wasn't turning. The door wasn't opening. No, there's no way. Why is it... Something was preventing him from turning the key, and no matter how much he tried, it didn't budge. Such a thing had never happened to him before. Did they learn about this door? Subsumed by the darkness, Katei fell to his knees in defeat. The last method of escape, which he'd held as a trump card for years, had betrayed him. The situation only became worse for him when he turned around. There was nothing there. Huh? Where are the Sekimeiya? The two telltale glows weren't there. When he crawled to where the suitcase should have been, he saw that it had vanished as well. On the floor, Katei was consumed by a wave of cold fear. He'd been outsmarted. There was no other explanation. Two doors blocked his view into hallway A, but he was scared to leave. Shin must have been there. Katei waited. Were they going to come now? That they've defeated him? What were they going to do? Would Katei's name be exposed? Those were the only thoughts he could formulate. Katei looked up. He had heard a brief sound. Someone was in the hallway. Slowly he rose and stepped out of the secret corridor, then gripped the doorknob. Hallway A was still dark, but a bit more light had begun to pass through the smoke cover. That was how he saw a human figure walking to the lobby as it carried a suitcase. It was Naomi, one of the people who must have fallen unconscious. Given the conversations he'd heard, Katei knew that she wasn't working with Shin. In an instant, he ran up behind her. He had to talk to her before everyone woke up. However, as soon as she heard his movements, Naomi sprinted away to escape him. When Katei set foot in the lobby, Naomi was nowhere to be seen. The hallway B door was slightly closed, but he couldn't rush. She could easily have been hiding behind the desk or in the room below. He stepped forward slowly. His goal was to find Naomi as soon as possible, to learn as much as she knew. What had happened, what she intended to do, and to retrieve the suitcase. But Katei didn't make it far before he turned back to the door. He'd heard footsteps on the other side of the hallway. He peered into the hallway, but the dark fog prevented a clear line of sight. Despite that, he was able to see that someone was there, and they began to go up the stairs. He ran without thinking. He had to stop Naomi no matter how much panic assaulted him. That grey door was unlocked. That was all he needed to confirm that it was Naomi who'd gone up. He stepped onto the second floor. The echoing sound of the footsteps was clearly audible. They were still running, so he had to pursue them. His life depended on it. He put all his strength into his legs and ran, disregarding everything else his body demanded. Rest and oxygen could wait. The stairs toward the fourth floor were before him. He maintained the highest speed possible, but he already knew everything was over. No matter what, the plan he'd crafted would never succeed. Before reaching the top, he tripped on a step. He intercepted the fall with his wrist, but he couldn't immediately stand back up. Fuck! When he managed to rise, he was about to keep running. However, he realized that that was a bad idea. Wait, shit, she's going to the attic! Finally, he understood how doomed he was. He couldn't open the attic, but Naomi would lock herself with the suitcase. Continuing to go up was a futile waste of time. In total disarray, Katei turned around. How much did Naomi know? Had she identified Katei? What was he supposed to do? Overwhelmed, he tried to think of a course of action. More people were on the crystal floor. He had to act as if he'd gotten trapped like everyone else. But there were many things that he had to take care of. His hands trembled as he walked back down. He balled them into fists and slowly released them. The trembling stopped. but he was internally collapsing. Attempting to calm breath, he walked to the crystal floor where he began to look around, as if he'd been innocently imprisoned. Oh, I see. Now we get to pick another one. Shin, I guess. So we get to see this bit from everybody's perspective, I guess. So I guess this will be Arkado's perspective? When the tower opened, Artise was the only person waiting outside. He wore light attire despite the cold. He bowed at the receptionist and stepped in slowly. A man walked up to him, asking for his ticket. After showing it and confirming they didn't have a phone, he stepped to the hallway B door. It was very early in the morning. For a while, all he heard was the receptionist shuffling a bunch of papers behind the desk. The next person he saw was Ido. Without looking over, he casually made his way to the hallway. It took him a while to come back. When he did, his clothes were different, and he was carrying a cleaning bucket. Artise was relieved. Nothing had happened, so Ido's part of the plan had gone well. He didn't have the cleaning card, as it was waiting for Artise with the fake Sekimeiya. Idly mopping the floor, Ido got close to Artise. That was when he dropped a tiny grenade in his pocket. At that point, everything was ready. The action was poised to begin. This is a great track. Oh, we got Mia today. Artise turned around when he heard something at his back. Two more people were by the entrance, a boy and a girl. Out of nowhere, Artise felt a sudden wave of heat. He'd seen that boy before. In Musashi Gemstones, he had been the first to be hit by the smoke. Atsuki Hakatoki was his name, and he'd been safely discharged from the hospital. Artise swiftly looked away. On that day, his face had been disguised. But what if he was recognized? He stared at the floor as they walked closer to him, clenching his fists tightly. He had to avoid eye contact. The boy next to him had lost someone, and it had been his fault. He had taken a glance at the girl as well. Although he hadn't seen her before, the eyes below her red hair looked identical to the boy's. 9 o'clock was distant. Long before it, police officers arrived outside the tower. Artise's rough facial description must have been known. He didn't think he'd be recognized, but he couldn't bring himself to look back. At once, a wave of people flooded in. Faint chatter took over the silence, but none of it reached Artise. He had to look calm and know exactly what to do. He saw someone he knew outside the lobby. However, that person didn't know who Artise was. His job was to take out a suitcase at 9:06. Ido had left through the opposite hallway a while ago. When he came back, he started to mop the floor a second time. Slowly, the time kept passing. After Ido was done with the little plaza, he entered again, mopping the new snowy footprints in the already shining floor. For a while he kept doing that. He had to stay there, as he knew that was soon to happen in the hallways. Shiroya? Artise's heart skipped a beat. Behind him, he heard the voice of Katei Kuiji. However, that name... Is this yours? I think you dropped it. Thank you. Artise's head slowly turned to the girl. She wasn't Shiroya. That was the name of the girl who must have died. But who was that then? Artise would soon learn. At 9 o'clock, the door to hallway B opened. Through it came Naomi Cabka, who gave a brief explanation of the event. Some of these last names always throw me off, like Cabka. Only 4 minutes were left. Are you through the first group? Yeah, we've been here for a while. Perfect, please follow me to the event room, to be the first to see the Sekimeiya. Quietly, the 3 people at the front of the line stepped into the hallway and were drawn to the room in the middle. A single cabinet was there, covered by a velvet curtain. It was a sight Artise had seen before through a picture. Alright, it would be helpful if you could tell me your names, so that I know how to address you. I'm Mia Moiromo. That was your name. It was one Artise remembered. Mia Moiromo. Had been in the shop as well, but she hadn't been hit by the impact of the explosion. Arkado Asata. For the first time in hours, Artise opened his mouth, voicing the name that had been on his ticket. Atsuki Hakatoki. Now he began to explain the story behind the Sekimeiya. As she did, Artise wondered if an ounce of truth was coming out of her mouth. Part of the experience is the touch. So I'll open the glass and let you experience it yourselves. However, I must insist that you be gentle and keep your hands inside the cabinet at all times. She took out a keyring. After inserting a small one into the cabinet, she unlocked it. I have a question. What is it? Artise suppressed his nervousness as best he could. The cabinet has been unlocked, so the plan was very close to succeeding. However, a few seconds still remained, until 9:04. He attempted to slow Naomi down. She had been about to raise the curtain and let them touch the gemstone. If that happened before the smoke was released, the Sekimeiya could be hit by it, which could later reveal that the clean one was Shin's fake. That's clever. You keep mentioning how valuable the Sekimeiya is, but is there proof of that? The way you're explaining it, you don't even say what kind of gem it is, only that it's rare. But the value could have been arbitrarily created by Ashiya, as it's not being officially recognised as anything more than an unusual discovery. Well, I'll let you decide that for yourself. As you said, it's not categorised because nobody was able to properly appraise it. That's all you need to be assured of its value. I apologise for being sceptical, but you must be aware that Ashiya aren't exactly recognised for their fairness. Do you have a reason to say that? Yes, that everyone in the lobby sounded as sceptical as I am. Maybe seeing it for yourself will convince you. That's what I'm hoping. After a pause, Naomi shook her head and crouched beside the cabinet. When she raised the curtain, a huge cloud of smoke rose with it, coming from the grenade Artis had taken out of his pocket. Before anyone could resist, Artis had already fallen to the floor. Looking down and covering his nose, he avoided having his consciousness fade. Once everyone plummeted down, a sudden unsettling silence consumed the room. What was happening outside? Had everyone evacuated? Had the gems been brought out in the suitcase? For a few seconds, Artis had to wait to make sure nobody remained conscious. He heard someone running through hallway A. Must have been the man with the gemstones, but why? 2 minutes hadn't passed yet. Artis's eyes widened. What the hell was that sound? He waited, wondering what was happening. Had the plan been a failure? After a few seconds, the loud noise faded. However, Artis could not hear anything outside the room. When he looked up, he couldn't believe he was in the same place. Very little light was being cast from the ceiling, and the walls had become dark. The 3 people who'd been with him were lying on the floor. Once he knew he could move, he silently stepped to hallway B. Again, it was hard to believe it was the same place as before, however nobody was there. Covering his face, Artis dashed to the cleaning room. It was light. Almost no smoke had gone through the door. Occupying most of the space, the cart sat in the room. Without hesitating, he dropped the smoke grenade inside it. The fake Sekimeiya was there, however Artis couldn't touch it with his bare hands, or he would leave smoky fingerprints on it. He took it with the clean sleeves of his shirt and brought it to the hallway, crouching so that the remaining smoke wouldn't make contact with it. Back in the event room, he walked to the cabinet. Like Naomi had been about to do, he raised the curtain. Huh? He stopped cold, suddenly filled with confusion. 2 glowing stones were in front of him. Why? He couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. Had there been 2 Sekimeiya? Artis had to rush, but he didn't know what to do. If he took both gemstones, Shin's plan would never work. Dumbfounded, he reached for one of the 2. He could only replace a single one. He felt a screen of glass that he was able to slide open. Then, without placing his fingers on it, he took a gemstone out, swapping it with his. Still in awe, he closed the glass and dropped the curtain down. He ran back with the gem in his hands. After locating the door, he moved to hallway B and silently went to the cleaning room. He dropped the Sekimeiya next to the grenade, and once he was done, Artis rushed back to the event room. He made sure to close the door and stepped to the spot where he'd fallen down. However, the darkness prevented him from noticing something. Naomi was no longer there. While Artis lay down, he heard sounds around him. The floor wasn't empty. Just what was happening? Everything started to become stranger when nobody entered where he was. His job was to stay there, and that's what he did. But he couldn't make sense of it. Why weren't they being rescued? But the boy woke up. That was the start of a very long day. During the previous weeks, Artis had come up with countless outcomes. However, the real one was far from any he'd devised. They were trapped. The alarm he'd heard had removed all methods of escape. When he learned Naomi had left the event room before his return, he had to hide his fear. Could she have noticed Artis' absence upon waking? I doubt it. That was one of his initial questions, but they didn't stop piling up. Artis would have to spend 12 hours in that building until he could leave. How does he know that? He doesn't even know what the security system is. I mean, I guess it's just the narrator saying that. Whatever. He didn't know how worried he had to be, or what had triggered the alarm. Even though the building is full of cameras, he knew not to be afraid of them. He was told the internet connection had been cut by the alarm. That meant that, in the meantime, Shin couldn't remotely access the computer. However, he knew his group well. According to Katei, at 9 o'clock, the connection would come back and Shin would immediately erase all the recording footage. He recalled the conversation he'd had with the boss, word by word. He knew how important it was for him not to fail. Therefore, despite the unforeseen alarm, Artis had only one priority: to make the plan a success. I mean, you're a dead man if you don't, so yeah, do whatever it takes, man. And it brought us back here so we can do Ashiya, which is nice because it's the perfect time for us to wrap this episode up, because we're out of time for this one. But I like seeing it from every perspective, that's nice. Give us a little bit of insight into everyone's thought process. So everyone's trying to get out of here with this thing. Well, except Ashiya, I suppose. But, what's Ashiya's perspective going to be? It's going to be from outside the tower? Like, from Lay's perspective or something? Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one. I'm going to sit and listen to this track for a while. It's a banger, man.